Yeah, I guess they are. Hi. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Art Rosenberg, Vice Chair. Miranda's on her way, so I can hand this over quickly. But we wanted to get started, so we're not going to be here all afternoon, hopefully. So if our process today is we're just going to do quick introductions, and then we're going to have the consultants start their process while we eat lunch, if that works for everybody. Unless anybody's got anything else for the good of the order, that's how we'll go ahead. You want to start?
My name is Tyler Mose. I'm on the Planning Commission.
And Brett Shuey, member of the Planning Commission.
Joseph Cecil, Planning Commission.
Dave Pepcorn, City Commission. I'm the liaison for the Planning Commission, and I want to thank you for all serving. And I hope you don't mind, but I like sitting in the back for your meetings, and so I enjoy watching you take your action, and thank you very much.
Michael Betlock, Planning Commission.
Paul Gley, Planning Commission.
Amy Haas, Planning Commission.
Tommy Schmidt, Planning Commission.
Nicole Crutchfield, Planning Department.
Pete Lombardi, CZB.
Matt Ingles, CZB.
Charles Bukey, CZB.
Christy Dodson, Code Studio.
Thomas Eddington, CZB.
Kim Satrowski, Fargo Planning.
Mark Williams, Planning Department.
Miranda Tassa, Planning Commission.
Now we're just going to wait for our presentations to start and have lunch. You have time. Go get it. Go ahead.
All right. No, thank you, commissioners. Again, Pete Lombardi from CZB, joined with my colleagues here, and we're very pleased to be with you today to talk about the kickoff of Fargo LDC 2026, the project to update the Land Development Code. What we'd like to do is, now that introductions are out of the way, we'll get right into a project overview, talk about the growth plan that was adopted earlier this year as a foundation and a source of direction for this LDC update process. We'll talk about the scope and timeline of this project, the phases, the rough dates the different phases will be completed during, and then talk about the public outreach components of this project and what to expect from that. And then we'll get into a discussion. We have doing a series of meetings this week on our visit, getting an initial sense from our different stakeholders of what's working, what's not working with the current code, to give us a sense of what's on people's minds as we start this process. And then we'll share some next steps. So that's our game plan here. And again, just in terms of introducing our team, we're reconstituting the group that completed the growth plan between 2023 and 2024. CZB, the project lead with Code Studio, a firm that has national experience doing the technical code writing, and strategic economics, who will be helping us with understanding the role of incentives as a layer of land development, as an important layer of land development. Our whole team is very happy to be back here in Fargo. So the overview here, as you're certainly aware, as the Planning Commission, the Fargo Growth Plan was adopted by the City Commission back in August on the recommendation of the Planning Commission, and is now the official policy guide for where and how Fargo grows. And it's the primary source of direction for this project. Before we started here, Kim passed out a little project direction handout that we're treating as an important foundational message for this project in terms of what the growth plan says about how and where Fargo will grow, how that has certain implications for an approach to the LDC update, and how that in turn will have an impact on how Fargoans experience new development and redevelopment in Fargo once the LDC gets redone. We're all sort of starting out this week really pushing the growth plan message and how that ties into the work that we'll be doing on the LDC. And so just, for the benefit of those who are less involved in the growth plan process, one big message from the growth plan is that Fargo intends to grow differently going forward when it comes to where growth happens. So going from an 80% growth in the greenfield areas that would reflect Fargo on its current path to no more than 66% of future growth happening in greenfield areas on the preferred growth scenario of the growth plan. So that is sort of one important message from the growth plan, this pivot in where Fargo grows. And just as important is the pivot in how Fargo grows. Fargo has been growing denser in the past decade. You have been seeing more mixed use, more integration of housing types. Part of the growth plan was really assessing how growth has been changing in Fargo in the past decade or two. And really the message going forward is to move further in terms of integrating housing types, mixing uses, creating better connectivity between neighborhoods, and really importantly is creating a substantially better form and design for new residential and commercial areas. So that was an important message we got from the public and from different stakeholders during the process. And it's very much in line with message coming from the Core Neighborhoods Master Plan before that, from Go 2030 before that. So a lot of the intentions stated in Fargo Growth Plan 2024 are very much a continuation of planning messages that have been coming from the public for over a decade in Fargo. So it was not news, the vision that came from the Fargo Growth Plan. And so to implement the Fargo Growth Plan, there are 4 models that are presented in the growth plan that will be important, provide important guidance for the LDC process here. The Fargo transect, recognizing that you have very important context differences depending on where you are within that rural to urban transect in Fargo. That has an influence on a place typology that the growth plan spells out, which importantly begins to shift Fargo from focusing mostly on land use to focusing on qualities of place, which land use are a part of, but there are other components that go into place types than just land use. So that's a second model that's an important shift for Fargo. And then the third and fourth models in the growth plan have to do with how growth happens in the ETJ. That's what the growth grid is all about, orderly growth in the north and south ETJ. And then growth centers is, channeling activity into, whether you're in the ETJ or in existing parts of Fargo, channeling activity as much as possible into regional community and neighborhood centers, where you will see your most intense mixed use integrated housing types happening and creating real places going forward. All of those models also exist within this framework of promoting by right approval and optimal growth. So by right approval says that once this LDC gets updated and integrates these 4 models, that if something is conforming with the place type that is identified for a location, and if it's in conformance with either the growth grid or the growth centers for its location, then it should be in line for by right approval, a simple, predictable process for approving a project that is following Fargo's intentions very closely. And then alongside that, this framework for optimal growth says that if something is in line for by right approval, and if it goes a step further and provides a clear public benefit that will, and a part of this process will be defining those public benefits, then it should be in line for active assistance by the city of Fargo in the form of one or more incentives to really underwrite the public benefit that will be derived from the project. So these 4 models, by right approval, optimal growth, are kind of the starting point for thinking about the LDC process here. And that's why a new land development code was identified as one of the key implementation steps and in part 4 of the Fargo Growth Plan, along with changes to financial and economic development practices, something that we'll be looking at as part of this work, as well as enhanced coordination of public infrastructure and facilities. So all of that combined is kind of the basis for Fargo LDC 2026. And in terms of the phasing for this project, we're getting into the timeline and scope here. We have 3 phases that we want to introduce to you today to help you think about how we're organizing our work and how we'll be organizing our work with you as a planning commission throughout this process. So the first phase, starting this month, we'll be doing intensive code analysis, review of existing documents and studies, a lot of things that we looked at during the growth planning process. We'll be reviewing with fresh eyes. We have some new members of our team that will be reviewing those things with fresh eyes. So that'll be a big part of phase 1. A big part of that as well will be the translation of the growth plan into a proposed district framework, converting those place types specifically into a proposed district framework for the new LDC. Small area testing will also be part of phase 1. So what we'll be doing with staff is identifying 4 or 5 distinct areas in the city of Fargo that are representative of challenges that you would witness citywide. So finding specific locations that have the right mixture of challenges and opportunities that we need to think through as we're drafting the new code, and doing some work in phase 1 to really understand those small areas, work with the stakeholders in those small areas to test some ideas. So all of that is a part of phase 1 that goes from now until August. And it overlaps with the start of phase 2, when we'll actually start working on draft code language and really rolling up our sleeves and developing the draft plan. So in phase 2, it's writing the district framework, writing development standards, identifying administrative protocols, really putting together all of the pieces that will be part of the new LDC, and sharing it with the Planning Commission, sharing it with the public and other stakeholders as we get iterative feedback to refine and hone that work. And that'll take almost a year. Phase 2 is almost a year, from April through March of 2026. And then the third phase is all about finalizing the code after we've been getting a lot of feedback from the public and builders and developers to that point. We'll be finalizing it, working with the City Commission through the adoption process, and a big part of phase 3 will be training with you as the Planning Commission, with staff, to make sure that everyone who's working with the new LDC feels comfortable about what it means to administer it, enforce it. So about 18 months there between now, December 2024 is the starting point, and July 2026 as the ending point.
Peter, I have a
yes.
question.
Go ahead.
For you two right there, how do I do this by April? What's it going to take? We got to get this done sooner. July's too late. April, I want this done by April. How do we do that?
We've been discussing that, and we think that what's possible is to basically, by April 2026, to be to a point where the draft is put together, it's been telegraphed all along the way, what's in it, what are the sticking points that are being ironed out, and to have a draft that is that for the Planning Commission, for the City Commission, that you know exactly what's in it, you know what the adoption will require, so that there are no surprises come April 2026.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, yes, we've been talking about, you might have heard me say a few times, I even said it last night at City Commission, where, hopefully by this, early this fall, we're going to know what those critical points are that we need to get right, where those points of disagreement are in our community, or where that navigation of conflict might need to happen. And so, and what we're saying with our small groups and with anybody, from the public, et cetera, the sooner we know where those conflicts are, the better. So in North Dakota, we don't necessarily like conflict, and so it's sometimes hard to talk about, but we want to be able to flush that out as part of this process. And so we know inevitably, we're going to be talking about change. Change is hard. We know this is hard, but we need to be able to talk frankly and directly and understand what's in the mix. On top of that, I'll just make the plug of, this is where, my leadership, the people I report to, trying to keep us as staff focused. And this is the priority of our office right now. So that might show up differently with at Planning Commission, just even last month, and soon, we're trying to come to decisions maybe quicker with complicated cases, so we get those in front of you quicker, because all the time we're spending in navigating difficult cases is time that's contradicting this. So you'll see us maybe be a little bit more definitive quicker when it comes to, because we have other priorities we need to be managing. And so, so maybe a little difference too on how you see us behaving at the staff level as well.
All right. And as we go through the process and as it becomes possible to become clearer about the timeframes or to adjust the timeframes as we move along, we'll keep you up to date on that possibility.
And then maybe one other point too is our philosophy as part of this project, as we've been working with the consultants, is we're going to learn things along the way. And so to be able to stay iterative and flexible and adaptable as needed. And so, so the idea is good communication throughout the project as we need to adapt with what we learn and find along the way.
And so an important part in terms of, having really robust conversations, with as many people as possible during this project to get to April and have no surprises. We have this, an advisory and outreach, components to this project that we just wanted to help you sort of picture at this point. We have 2 technical advisory committees. We kicked off our meetings with both of them this morning. One is an advisory committee of city staff that is focused mostly on the LDC and kind of the technical aspects of the LDC. And then the other advisory committee is focused on incentives. And again, city staff who are focused on the technical aspects of economic development incentives. So those are 2 committees that we'll be working with very closely to understand what's working and what's not working about existing policies, and they'll be vetting drafts, and we'll be bouncing ideas off of them throughout the project. So that'll be 2 groups that we'll be working very closely with. We also have focus groups that we'll be assembling as part of this process, and we'll be meeting with all 4 of the focus groups you see here on our visit this week. So a group that includes folks, another group that's focused on incentives, but this will be EDIC and Renaissance Zone folks. A focus group with designers, architects, engineers who work with the current LDC, who will be important for testing ideas as we develop draft concepts. Developers and builders will be another key focus group. We'll be working with meeting with the BIA tomorrow to kick off our process with them. And then there will be a neighborhood and more of a general public focus group, folks who are, advocates for their neighborhoods, who are in touch with the city frequently when it comes to land use or infrastructure issues in their neighborhoods. That'll be a 4th focus group. Another group another set of outreach that we'll be doing in terms of these small areas that I mentioned, where we'll be identifying 4 or 5 areas and doing some detailed, looks under the hood to understand how concepts from the growth plan, hit the ground in certain parts of the city. There will be stakeholder groups in each of those areas that we'll be interfacing with, property owners, residents in those areas. And then the general public will be part of this through a couple of different approaches. One, we'll have LDC workshops about 5 times during this process, where the general public can attend, learn about the current LDC, and depending on where we are in the project, getting a sense of draft concepts, and providing feedback that helps to inform the drafts that get developed early next year. Another component is called Code Connect. That will be an online update every couple of months. Anyone can log into a video call, get an update presentation, and then participate in a Q&A. We'll also have some presentations during those Code Connect events where we'll be presenting information about special topics related to land development and zoning, to give members of the public some good general background on the issues that are related to the LDC update. And all of that will be accessible from fargoldc.org, a website that was just launched a few days ago, to keep the public informed on this process. So before we get into kind of a more general discussion here, any questions from any planning commissioners about any of this background on the process?
I have a quick question. So there was the different groups, and if anybody here that's watching or in the planning commission has a suggestion for a person for one of the groups, should they contact the planning department? Is there a certain person to contact? Can you just talk a little bit about that? Obviously, the designers, builder, everybody might have somebody that they want to include. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Mm-hmm. Kim Satrowski is the city's project manager on this project, and we've been, assembling kind of a starter roster of folks for those focus groups. But Nicole or Kim, if you'd like to address,
Yeah, as you can say, anybody that's maybe watching this or has questions can always email planning@fargond.gov, or is that the right? .gov. And so also for planning commissioners and for public, anybody that might have interest in these particular topics are welcome to come to the meetings or listen in. I know some of you wear different hats in our community and may have gotten a direct invitation to some of these focus groups that we're having. We're having one today and one tomorrow, I believe. And and there was a press announcement about that, but at the same time, if you want more direct involvement, just reach out and let us know based on these topics. Eventually, these topics will all come together into one conversation, but right now we're kind of starting out as separate subject areas, but the idea is by the end, they're all baked in as the final product. So eventually, it's going to be one working group as we merge all together.
I think my other thought with it is that the planning commission needs to be more engaged than normal on this. So I think we need to you need to provide us more information on a regular basis. Like those focus groups, I'd like to see the report back on each one of those. Whatever you're sending to the planning department with what happened at that meeting so that we can see what's going on. And also make sure that we're invited. I don't want the planning commissioners to have to work all the time, but if they're available, we need to be engaged as much as we can so that when this thing gets close to the end, we're not wondering what's happening. And I see we're going to have some meetings where we have some workshops, but it'd be nice to be prepared for those instead of walking in and wondering what's happening. So if we can be engaged and at least invited to things, or when we're having meetings or consultants or some kind of reports that are coming that could be sent to the commissioners, I think that would help us be able to move this thing faster without being surprised. I don't want more work for the department, but if it's already there, it'd just be nice if you can send it to everybody. So, and then I think we need to look at least maybe every month or every other month, have it on the agenda that that the stuff went out, and if there's a few minutes that somebody has questions about something, we can have those work with Kim and get it back to the consultants and keep things moving forward. That would be nice to do for this next year while we're doing this stuff.
Yeah, those are all great comments, and we'll be sure to get some routines that you can expect on.
Can we get a copy of this PowerPoint as well? Is that possible? Okay, thanks.
Yeah, those are all great comments, and we'll be sure to get some routines that you can expect on. Can we get a copy of this PowerPoint as well? Is that possible? Okay, thanks.
Can we get a copy of this PowerPoint as well?
Couple of questions of two groups. I want to see where they fit within your focus groups, but, economic development, business community, those that are going to be renting or purchasing what the developers and builders create, do they have a place in that focus group? And then especially in Fargo, other public infrastructure, so university space is obviously very important to us, but public education as well. Do they have a voice in this development, as many of them are going through their own growth plan initiatives?
Yeah, and Commissioner, if I can, for some reason, the room echoes a little bit when you get in certain situations, just to make sure. So kind of can you repeat the question a little bit more? Yeah.
Sure. Where would groups such as economic development, business community members fit within these focus groups, especially as we move to these more core areas? What type of business is actually sustainable there? And then also public entities like university, public education, so on, that are going through their own growth planning. Where will they have a voice in the focus groups?
Sorry, great, thank you for that. So I would say, generally speaking, the incentives category, as it applies to businesses and economic development, so that includes our Economic Development Corporation, the Chamber, other business activities related to that incentives discussion. In terms of the university and between the knowledge experts in the architecture department, but also the university subject matter and the neighborhood surrounding in that neighborhoods category as well. And then not to be advised like the general public, we're going to have a lot of PR and announcements and outreach for that. And I think it's also important to highlight that, the visioning part of the elements, between the comprehensive plan and the growth plan, those broad visioning categories are, I don't want to say is done, but we're kind of done in the big picture thinking, and now it's like how to make that into today's built environment. And so a lot of feedback related to those really technical. We imagine some people are really excited about that, and some people, as we dive into the details, are going to not want to be part of that discussion. So having that flexibility for understanding which audiences are going to want to dive in deep, and which audiences are wanting to stay high level. So we're pretty flexible in that.
Any other questions before we move into discussion here? All right. So what we wanted to do here, as our first discussion with you on this project, and we're doing it with basically every other group we're talking to this week, is just get a sense here at the beginning of what's on your mind in terms of what's working about the current LDC, current processes related to the LDC that you would want to see preserved or maintained in some respect as we shift into a new LDC. So that's sort of one subject, one group of subjects we want to talk about, and then also what if you have sort of a list of things that you think are not working and absolutely need to be at the top of our list in terms of things that get ironed out, modified as we work through the LDC. That's the other group. So we don't need to start on one or the other for this discussion here. If anyone would like to start out with, something you think is working or not working, just to get things started, we'll be happy to sort of discuss how that can fit into this process here.
I can go with with a point, and this is something that's not working in my opinion, and I think just in general, parking as just a broad term. So my perspective, I've been on the Planning Commission now since 2022, and just about every meeting we have a discussion about parking, and the amount of energy and discussion that we have and the amount of energy that staff has and applicants talking about parking, it's unbelievable how much time we spend talking about parking. And I know that there are better ways to do it. I know that our parking minimums in our current LDC are really high. And I think that has pretty negative consequences on our built environment. So something I noticed actually on Black Friday this last year. So it's supposed to be the biggest shopping day of the year. I ended up driving by the mall on the south side of the mall, and almost that entire parking lot on the south side of the mall was completely empty. And for the most part of the year, that's completely empty as well. So we have these requirements and minimums that force entities to build excess parking that just sits there, and it's unproductive land. And so I mean, that's one consequence of our current parking situation. And then I see places around the country that are eliminating parking minimums. And if that works for Fargo or not, I'm not sure, but it seems like it's catching on across the country, not just in big cities, but I saw this last year, Wilmer, Minnesota. That's a small town. They eliminated parking minimums, and they leave it to the developers and the business owners to make those decisions themselves. And I just think that's probably a better way to do this, so we're not wasting our land potential and mandating excess parking that just kind of sits there. And so I think, and that was kind of a rant, but parking has got to be one of the top 5 goals that we address and kind of nip in the butt here.
Yeah, that's definitely something that's on our radar. I think in the LDC diagnostic work that was done a few years ago, that was, kind of outdated parking requirements were, one of the findings there. And the work that Code Studio did as part of the growth plan identified that as, being an issue that needs to be addressed in the LDC rewrite here. So that's, we definitely have that on our radar. Thank you.
Obviously, the PUD is the issue. It's the zoning that we're not, we don't have enough zoning selective process so that we can get form-based, because we do a PUD every meeting because nothing works right now in the plan. So we need to figure out how to get those zoning structures in place sooner than later to try to reduce that. Because my biggest concern is that the south side of Fargo that's not being developed, they're just going to jam everything through on PUDs right now to try to race us to get this done before they're going to do it, because it's the devil you know versus the devil you don't. And even though this code will be way better for them, they don't believe it. Investors know what they know now and know how to work it, and they're going to work it fast. And that's my biggest worry, is being able to try to, slow them down and work them a little bit harder with PUDs, and make sure that the public good is being more emphasized than it has been in the past, to force that delay or that process a little bit better. And then also just getting rid of PUDs completely so that we're down to just variances in the code that, somebody needs a garage built and it just doesn't work unless we figure out some way to help them do something. But we're not doing this complete rewrite every time, because I would say every meeting we have at least one that's a complete rework of the code, because they can't do anything without it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would say one issue that's not working because it's missing really is the consideration of quality. That is, so much of the LDC has to do with technical things like setbacks and so on, but what one does behind those setbacks is not addressed. And so what we're seeing in the core neighborhoods, for example, is infill development that is out of scale, that has design qualities that are really offensive to the context. And so the issue of design quality, I think, should be a really important part of the LDC. Part of that is historic preservation. We have substantial historic neighborhoods in Fargo. There are 6 districts on the National Register of Historic Places. Absolutely no protections. Downtown Fargo is on the National Register. There is no design protection of any kind for downtown Fargo. You can do anything you want there. And so I think these kinds of issues of how we design things and what we design is a really important part of the LDC, beyond just the technical issues of things like setbacks and parking.
Yeah, I think a clear message, and, we kind of spell it out in this, project direction handout, is that the expectation from the growth plan and from other previous plans is that, standards for form and design should be higher, and that they need to be baked into the LDC. So that's, I think, something that the growth plan is pretty explicit about, and we definitely see it as part of our first stage of work here, understanding what that means in terms of an updated LDC. So that's a very fair point.
I guess I have more of a question for you guys than structure. On the covenants, is this going to help reduce covenants too when we do this LDC? I mean, we're seeing some of these covenants that have some extreme things in it that 20 years ago made sense, and then now they're coming in asking us to change them because that didn't make sense long-term, but they don't care. I mean, is this, in other places, are you seeing a reduction of covenants? I mean, I get concerned about letting these developers just throw whatever they want in there, and because they're doing it, and then all of a sudden they're coming back 5 years later. I mean, look at Urban Plains. Not to pick on them, but I mean, the covenants they created when they started was ridiculous for what it is today, because it's not even close to the same plan. So, and we're constantly having to change things because they went to the extreme for that point. And so my question then is that happening everywhere, or what's the option? I don't know legally what we can or can't do, but I'm just concerned that we're just letting people be able to do something and then we're fixing it later.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. As far as conditions that are put in place through the zoning process, yes, a significant reduction in those. Private covenants are really a different matter. Those are civilly litigated and enforced outside of even the city's purview. But I will say that most developers, when the codes go in place, feel that they have less need for those. So while the existing ones are a bit outside of the purview, new ones, there's a significant reduction generally.
This is a question that I have, but I think it's also something that maybe is not working. In the new LDC, is the expectation that the amount of zoning districts are reduced or simplified? And I could come at it looking at, like, we have SR 1 through 5. And I think from the general public, that's confusing. You have to look up in, current LDC, but are we expecting it to look more like is it the transect? Is that what you describe in the growth plan, where it's more of a gradient of different types within that?
Yeah, I think certainly one of the goals is to make the district framework as simple and straightforward as possible. That's one of the observations that I think we made and we included in the appendix of the growth plan, is that there could be some consolidation with some of the districts, and maybe what are now separate districts combined into maybe one mixed-use type district that can accommodate all those types of uses with specific design parameters in place as well. So I think you will, can't guarantee you're going to see a reduction, but you're certainly going to see a simplification, even in the nomenclature and the names of the districts and things like that. I think you'll see an improvement with them being more accurate with the district's purpose and intent.
I have a question for planning staff. If you've thought of any areas of case studies, have you thought that far yet of what you might look as a case study of what hasn't necessarily worked? And if you haven't, that's fine. Putting you on the spot.
And I don't know where we're at, Kim, maybe as we're talking about that, kind of small test scale and we're calling it break the code, but this like kind of design workshop kind of processes of giving it to experts in our community to try to design out of it type of thing. So we'll have processes along the way, but maybe Kim or the CZB team, have you gotten as close to starting to define which areas we're testing, or maybe Thomas, you've been thinking about that?
Yeah, so we're starting to define maybe 4 or 5 areas that we think are kind of code test areas, maybe a greenfield area down in the South ETJ, but also I think it's going to be important for us to, as you look back at the growth plan, think about some of those areas that are defined as centers. Maybe start to take a look at those. It could be maybe the area up in Sanford, Roosevelt. That area could be a small code test area, maybe Unicorn Park, or even maybe south of there, Madison Unicorn, maybe south of there, actually Bruhala in that area as kind of a redevelopment area. What might code testing look like there? So we're starting to explore those. You actually mentioned the parking at the mall, West Acres, that area, maybe along that corridor could be a code test area as well to start to figure out infill opportunities, as well as, you know, how do we change parking standards, those kinds of things.
Thank you.
I work with the LDC a lot as an architect on working on projects here in Fargo, so I have to kind of dissect it quite often to make sure my projects are meeting what's required. And I think that a lot of the times I end up seeing things in the LDC that I don't know exactly what the benefit would be, that I'm hoping that in the new LDC could be looked at. So things like landscape buffers, I understand the purpose of them, but when you read the current requirements of them, it's kind of like, oh, does that even really do anything for us? Or things like glazing requirements on street sides seeming to be a somewhat arbitrary percentage of, you know, of the elevation of that side of the building. You know, is that actually benefiting anybody? Is that doing what the intent is trying to achieve here? So I think looking at the nitty-gritty of some of those things and seeing around town what those look like, and, you know, are they actually doing what we want those to set out to do? I think that would be a good effort in the new LDC.
I think the housing study that was completed is an example of something that's working. So seeing how that can really be turned into concrete action through the LDC would be useful.
And specifically, like where the housing study identifies, you know, types of housing that might be needed but difficult to develop because of development standards or just, you know, idiosyncrasies of sites in the city.
Exactly. I mean, you talk about looking at the well-defined public benefits and investing more so in there. So having some targeted investment for that missing middle and some of those key needs.
I would say a hope of mine is that there be a close working relationship between the LDC and the engineering department regarding streets, street widths, what are appropriate streets for certain land use types. I feel sometimes that coordination is not as close as it could be, and I hope the LDC can address that.
Mm-hmm. And as part of our technical advisory committee, we do have city engineering represented there. They'll be a very important part of that process. Yeah.
Maybe along those lines, real quick, we'll be working really closely with our engineering department, our inspections department, our assessors and finance department, and city administration in terms of both holistically and strategic economic development. And I think those are the main ones. And so we'll be doing a lot of work groups with even, you know, the other levels of staff. We have all our planning department here, but there's, you know, if you can imagine, a good dozen or so that work with the LDC every day, and making sure we're getting their feedback and involvement throughout the process. So we'll have a lot of internal, like this afternoon and tomorrow, working with them to make sure we get their perspectives as well.
Well, the other thing we talked about recently was some kind of a roadmap or a letter or some kind of a process that we're creating in between this. Is there some recommendations? Obviously, the one thing you could do is not allow anyone to have anything for 18 months, which isn't a reality. That's not a possibility, and especially in this market because of the growth that's happening. But is there some, because we had talked about, some of the process things that we need to tell the developers or some of the expectations in this period where we're in flux. Like one of the things we had talked about was you need to apply to the planning department before you apply to get incentives, so that we're in front of that and start setting that standard, because it doesn't make any sense for them to start talking to Jim Gilmore about getting incentives and doing that when they haven't even got their plan approved to do zoning differences or whatever else happens. Is there some plan in place here in the next, 30 or 60 days that's going to bring some recommendations and get this thing moving so that we can make sure we're trying to regulate as we build this out?
Yeah, I think, in November, I came to the Planning Commission with kind of a memo that talks about, kind of trying to get a technical advisory memo, if you will. I think the idea in my head was a little bit more baked out than the physicality of it. So we're working on it right now. And I think really the challenge at hand is, and we're having some internal conversations, really related to annexations and growth needs related to annexation. And so it's a tricky subject because when you start to compare the needs on the north side and the needs to the south side, maybe the drivers of those annexation, kind of curiosity or questions are maybe different. And so trying to bake a right size fits all. Where you're seeing staff, so the short answer is we're working on it and hopefully to come to you within the next month or so as some ideas. I think what we're struggling right now with is probably anything that's negotiated. And you saw a little bit of that at the December meeting. You're probably forthcoming in January, February, but anything that's negotiated. So that's your overlays, your planned unit developments, anything that requires judgment from staff outside our precedent is giving us pause that we want to make sure to include you, the Planning Commission, and the public process more fully than than what we did in the past. And what we did in the past is maybe kind of negotiate, and that negotiation could take 6 months. Well, as we come up against recommendations from this, of that 6-month timeline, we're even asking the applicants, you might want to wait, because either we can keep working with you on a daily basis to get it right, or you might, if you're losing patience, you might want to wait a little bit. And so we're kind of having different situations. So that's a little bit of the lay down memo you got at the December meeting. And so it's a little bit of a case by case, but you'll see us kind of, to your point, are communicating with you a lot more detailed than maybe we've had to have in the past.
I've got a question for planning. Does the LDC dictate what comes before Planning Commission? And I guess the context is during the growth plan discussions, one of the expectations is that Planning Commission will hear fewer cases because more things will be by right to be able to do. And as a specific example, at the December Planning Commission meeting, we had an item that was a minor subdivision to go from a 5-lot subdivision to 4-lot. To me, that was, there was zero discussion on that, and it just seems like something that should have just been stamped and, yep, go ahead and do that. Does the LDC determine if we have to hear those kind of things, or can we not hear those things that are pretty straightforward? I don't know, just a suggestion.
That and the century code a little bit, and I do think we're going to be analyzing all those processes because I think we also struggle with different types of subdivisions and what could be administrative versus what actually the Planning Commission, and how that lines up with state law.
One question that I had, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
So when I was in Rochester on the Planning Commission down there, any major project that came through had to come through the Planning Commission. They had to present all their plans, and that allowed us to be able to push back on like to your point, quality of the building, how it blends into the community. And I know we don't want to bring more stuff in front of us necessarily, but I believe that something like that might be beneficial because then we can have a little more say on what gets built.
I would encourage really looking at this process as the crown jewel of opportunities to determine what gets built. So for the next 12 months is really the opportunity to make those determinations, as opposed to negotiated agreements later on. Whether that's negotiations with staff, negotiations with planning commission, negotiations in the hallways between commissions. The goal is to remove unpredictability from the system. And so that is effectively what a by right code does. So working backwards from that, the next 12 months is really heavy input time to shape the districts, shape the framework, shape the rules of administration. This is the opportunity to really get what you want.
Just a quick question regarding incentives. Are those going to be kind of a one-size-fits-all as well? Or say, in particular, a large developer is going to be receiving the same incentives to build or to use a portion of land as maybe a small business or a homeowner. Is that going to be more individualized, or is that, like I said, one-size-fits-all?
You really want your incentives to be responsive to the aspiration for the parcel, for the aspiration for the set of parcels, the aspiration for a particular location in the city, not responsive to the balance sheet.
That was the comment I wrote down. I guess just a general comment is just making sure we're cognizant of, where we identify areas that needs new development or redevelopment, just aligning those with the incentive program, just so that we do need developers. And so we want to make sure we're not making it too difficult or too easy to pass these things. That just a comment.
Well, yes and no. You want to make it very difficult to build a marginal product with city help, right? And you want to make it very easy to build a great product with city help.
All right, good comments so far, good questions. Anything else on your mind right now in terms of what's working, what's not working, or just some things you hope to see as we work through this process?
I really wanted to talk to Art about table topics and kitchen table conversations.
It's not on the agenda for today. Yeah.
I do have one question, just being a new planning commissioner. How would you suggest we or I best study, prepare, come best equipped to help with this whole process?
That's a fabulous question, and I'm going to defer to the experts here.
The first thing is just to come with examples where you've made really difficult decisions and maybe you haven't gotten the outcomes that you would want to see. And that, I think, goes both ways. So your example of saying, why are we hearing this? This should just be something that is staff reviewed. And that's something we can delegate elsewhere. And conversations that you've had where you feel like you've done your best negotiating, but the code didn't give you what you needed to arrive at the outcome that you desired. So coming with some concrete examples that we can dig into as a team, because we want to make sure that we give you standards that the code is already bringing you a good project, and the conversations you're having is making it from good to excellent.
Yeah, and I'll just add and build on what Charles mentioned earlier about, really thinking about what you want in those outcomes. And then if they give you what you want, are you willing to accept a by right approval? So in other words, you zone for what you want. You have to decide what you want to be able to zone for it. But if you get that, then that's the by right approval. So what needs to happen for you to get you what you want, so you accept a by right approval and take the discretion out of it.
One of the things I was going to suggest too is, since we do have, maybe just to recognize, we do have a few new members here that were not part of the Core Neighborhoods Plan or part of the growth plan even until the end of it. And so maybe a couple, kind of guidelines. One is, there's no wrong question or wrong issue to bring up and talk about. Either if you don't feel comfortable on the microphone, just reach out to any staff, and we're glad to have at-length conversation about any type of detail that you're seeing. Also, a step as part of that visioning process of growth plan development, and all of you wear different hats in our community. You all went through a pretty selective interview process, and you're all part of the development community in some shape, way, or form. And so I would say bring your knowledge and expertise. If you have pictures, examples of got your own personal projects or things as you drive around and you see how did this get there, feel free to take a snapshot of that, and we can talk about it. So between the vested interests, we were joking at our other staff, is we have a lot of tenured staff between engineering, inspections, and planning that we all have stories about everything that got built, literally. And so if you want to know more about something and how that got where, just send a picture and we'd be glad to chat about it.
Yeah, I would say to add to that, as you're living in the community and going to stores and going to functions, and you see something that works really well or something you really like, make a note of it and bring it here. A lot of what's out there that is really good was just done naturally without any code, but some of it has been encouraged. But on the flip side, if you see something that's like, oh my goodness, what happened there? Probably reach out to us, because there's probably some history behind it, and then we can maybe point to the code on what might not be working there.
Could you guys send us or provide us a couple places where LDCs are really good, where other communities, so that the commissioners could at least take a look at some of those and kind of get a feel for what that's going to look like when we do it for real here? I think that would help us be able to at least kind of get a little feel for what we're doing as we go through this process.
Yep, yeah, we can do that. Let me get to next steps here, because I know it's running short on time. Just to give you a sense of what we're doing over the next couple of weeks into the new year. We're working right now on identifying those small areas for code testing. Thomas mentioned a few initial ideas that we have. Part of our work this week is to get some feedback to hone in on those, the right set of small areas to proceed with in phase one. Then we'll be doing, our policy and regulatory reviews, code analysis, and translating those place types into some draft thinking on districts. And then our next round of meetings, we are looking at the week of February 24th, and that will coincide with a first public LDC workshop. And so to your request, Art, part of our preparation for that will be making sure that the Planning Commission kind of knows what the game plan is for that workshop and how you can effectively participate in that. So you can put that on your calendar just as a little hold. That'll be a week of lots of activity around this project. And with that, anything else?
Could we also include John and Rocky for that workshop?
Absolutely, and they've been invited to some of the meetings that are today and tomorrow, too. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments before we wrap up then? All right, well, thank you.
Thank you, guys.